The bell above the diner door chimed softly as morning sunlight spilled across cracked vinyl booths. It was a small roadside diner in Ohio, the kind where the coffee was always hot and the same locals came in every day. Sarah sat near the window, staring at a plate of eggs and toast she hadn't touched. Across from her, her 6-year-old son Ethan swung his legs beneath the table, completely focused on his pancakes, drowning them happily in syrup. Sarah smiled when he laughed, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She hadn't slept much. All night, numbers had circled her thoughts. Rent due in 5 days, electricity overdue, the last warning notice folded in her purse like a secret she couldn't escape. She had learned how to stretch meals, how to make excuses, how to tell herself hunger was something she could control. The waitress stopped by, refilling Ethan's glass. "You okay, honey?" she asked Sarah kindly. "Yes, just not very hungry," Sarah replied quickly, the words practiced and smooth. Ethan looked up then, his face sticky and curious. He studied his mother's untouched plate the way children notice things adults hope they won't. He tilted his head and asked in a small, clear voice, "Mommy, why aren't you eating?" The question landed harder than Sarah expected. For a moment, the noise of the diner faded, the clinking dishes, the low chatter, the hum of the grill. She opened her mouth, ready to lie, but nothing came out. How do you explain worry to a child? How do you explain that sometimes adults pretend they're fine so their kids don't feel scared? "I'm just full," she finally said, pushing a piece of toast toward the edge of the plate. Ethan nodded slowly, not fully convinced, but he went back to eating. Sarah stared out the window at passing cars and thought about how different life had been 2 years ago. Back then, she worked full-time at a retail store, always tired but always paid. Then the layoffs came. Promises of callbacks turned into silence. Applications disappeared into online systems that never replied. Each rejection chipped away at her confidence, but she kept going, for Ethan. She told herself missing meals was a small price to pay. Kids don't remember sacrifices, she thought. They remember being fed. Still, Ethan's question echoed in her mind, louder than the diner bell. When the check arrived, Sarah counted bills twice before placing them on the tray. As they stood to leave, Ethan slipped his small hand into hers. "Mommy," he said quietly, "next time you should eat too. Eating makes you strong." Sarah swallowed hard. She knelt to his level and hugged him a little tighter than usual. In that moment, she realized something she'd been avoiding. Pretending everything was fine wasn't protecting Ethan, it was teaching him to ignore his own needs. As they stepped outside into the cold morning air, Sarah felt a shift inside her. One simple question from a child had exposed a truth she could no longer hide from herself. Something had to change, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that change might still be possible. The walk home from the diner felt longer than usual. Cold air brushed Sarah's face as Ethan skipped beside her, humming a tune he'd made up. His small hand stayed wrapped around hers, warm and trusting. With every step, his question replayed in her mind, not accusing, just honest. "Why aren't you eating?" It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about everything she had been silently carrying. When they reached their apartment, Sarah sorted the mail on the kitchen counter. Another bill, another reminder. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with a decision she hadn't felt in months. She wasn't going to hide anymore. That afternoon, she packed her resumes into a worn folder, dressed in her cleanest sweater, and told Ethan they were going on an adventure. They walked 3 blocks to the community center, a place Sarah had passed many times without entering. Inside, the walls were covered with flyers, job training programs, food assistance, childcare support. A volunteer at the desk greeted them with a gentle smile. Sarah hesitated, then spoke. Her voice shook as she admitted she needed help. Instead of judgment, she received understanding. The volunteer listened patiently, nodding as Sarah explained her situation. She helped her fill out forms for a food program and signed her up for a job readiness workshop starting the next week. Another staff member brought Ethan crayons and paper, and he sat quietly, drawing a picture of their family under a big sun. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt her shoulders relax. Asking for help didn't make her weak. It made her human. That evening, With groceries from the community pantry, Sarah cooked a simple dinner: rice, vegetables, and chicken. The smell filled the small apartment, warm and comforting. She set the table and sat across from Ethan, noticing how he watched her closely. She lifted her fork and took the first bite. Ethan's face lit up. "You're eating," he said proudly, as if he'd won a prize. "Yes," Sarah smiled, "and it's good." As they ate, Sarah talked to him honestly, in words he could understand. She told him that sometimes adults struggle, but there are people who help when you ask. Ethan listened carefully, nodding like he was learning something important. Later that night, after Ethan fell asleep, Sarah filled out more job applications. She felt tired, but it was a different kind of tired, one mixed with hope. She thought about the volunteers' kindness, the warm meal, and her son's simple wisdom. One small question had changed the direction of her day, and maybe her life. In a country full of second chances, Sarah realized new beginnings don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they start quietly, at a diner table, with a child brave enough to ask the truth, and a mother finally ready to listen. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains as Sarah woke before the alarm. For once, her first thought wasn't panic. It was purpose. Ethan slept curled on his side, clutching his favorite toy. Watching him breathe steadily, Sarah felt a calm determination settle in her chest. Yesterday had reminded her that change didn't happen all at once, but it could begin with one brave step. After breakfast, they walked back to the community center. This time, Sarah didn't hesitate at the door. She attended the job readiness workshop while Ethan stayed in the childcare room. The instructor spoke about confidence, interview skills, and believing in your own worth. Sarah listened closely, taking notes like a student who had rediscovered her future. When it was her turn to introduce herself, her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. She talked about her retail experience, her reliability, and her willingness to learn. For the first time in months, she felt seen. Over the next week, Sarah followed a new routine. Mornings were for applications and calls. Afternoons were for workshops or volunteer hours arranged through the center to build experience. Evenings were for dinner with Ethan, homework, and shared laughter. The apartment hadn't changed, the bills were still there, but Sarah had changed. She no longer skipped meals. She no longer hid. One afternoon, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Sarah answered, holding her breath. It was a grocery store manager who had reviewed her application. They needed someone dependable, part-time at first, with the possibility of more hours. Sarah thanked him, her voice steady even as her hands shook. When she hung up, she sat quietly for a moment, letting the reality sink in. It wasn't everything, but it was something. It was a door opening. That night, she told Ethan the news over dinner. "I got a job," she said simply. Ethan's eyes widened. "Like a real job?" "Yes," she laughed. "A real one." He grinned and raised his glass of milk. "Then we should celebrate." They celebrated with extra laughter and a shared dessert. As Sarah cleaned up, she noticed how full the apartment felt, not with things, but with hope. She thought back to the diner, to the untouched plate, to the question that had started it all. Days turned into weeks. Sarah learned the rhythm of her new job, greeting customers, stocking shelves, earning honest pay. She worked hard, but she worked with pride. The manager noticed. So did Ethan, who waited every evening to hear about her day. One night, as she tucked him into bed, Ethan looked at her and asked, "Mommy, are you okay now?" Sarah kissed his forehead. "I'm getting there." And she meant it. Because sometimes, life doesn't change because of big speeches or dramatic moments. Sometimes it changes because a child asks a simple question, and a mother finally answers it with action.